Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies as we continue with part 10 of The Origin of Freemasonry and Knights Templar by John R. Bennett. Jewish history. The first Jewish history extends from the time of the conquest of Canaan, 1445 BC, to the establishment of the monarchy under Saul, 1095 BC. During this period, Israel was governed in the name of Jehovah by judges who were the rulers, chiefs, or leaders of Israel, a theocracy. Previous to the conquest, Moses had been given their lawgiver and leader. After him, Joshua, the general, gave the people peace by war. And after the conquest, a series of rulers arose, known as judges, for they judged Israel. Sometimes, for an interval, there was no judge at all. During such interval, every man was at liberty to do what seemed good in his own eyes. By and by, the example of the surrounding nations produced the infection of monarchy in Israel. The people clamored for a king. The uncertain judgeship proved only an equivocal defense against the strong, personal governments of the adjacent pagan nations, under the popular impulse and against the theocratic principle. Saul, the son of Kish, of the tribe of Benjamin, was chosen for the royal honor and was anointed king by the prophet Samuel. With this event, the second period of Israelite-ish history begins. Saul anointed. Saul was a warrior. He was an austere and able man, cordially disliked by the priesthood, between whom and himself there was a conflict of authority. He began his reign by making war on the adjacent tribes, whom he reduced to subjection, the first of whom were the Ammonites. He then fell upon the Philistines, whom he routed with great slaughter in the decisive battle of Michmash. Then the Moabites, Amalekites, and Edomites were successfully driven beyond the borders of Israel. Meanwhile, the intractable spirit of the king had given the priest opportunity to incite discontent, and an anti-Saul party had arisen among the people, and popular attention was directed to young David as the coming ruler of Israel. David was one of the most remarkable characters in history. He was a son of Jesse and was born in Bethlehem, Judea, about 1085 BC. Jesse was the son of Obed and the grandson of Boaz and Ruth. Boaz was the lineal descendant of Phares, the son of Judah. Genesis 38, Ruth 4, 13 through 22. In his youth, David followed the occupation of a shepherd, and he appears to have acquired great skill as a musician. When about 22 years of age, he was received into the household of Saul, king of Israel, who, we are told, was troubled with an evil spirit. David, by playing upon the harp, soothed and refreshed Saul, and the evil spirit departed from him. On the breaking out of war with the Philistines in 1063 BC, he seems to have been released from the house of Saul and returned home to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. His father soon after sent him to the camp of King Saul with provisions for his brethren. On his arrival, he found the two armies drawn up in battle array ready for attack, and as he talked with his brethren, Goliath, the Philistine giant, came forth and, for the 40th time in as many days, offered his challenge for a single combat. David prevailed upon Saul to let him go and meet him, whereupon he chose 5 smooth stones out of the brook and put them in a shepherd's bag which he had, and, with his sling in hand, he drew near the Philistine. Goliath came on, and David put his hand in his bag and took thence a stone, and slang it, and smote the Philistine in the forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. For this and other deeds of valor, according to the promise of the king, he received Michal, Saul's youngest daughter, in marriage. He was given a command in the army and acquitted himself well on all occasions, and rapidly gained the confidence and love of the people. But Saul was offended by the praises which David received for his prowess, and not only regarded his son-in-law with bitter jealousy, but made repeated attempts upon his life. David, at length, 1056 BC, was obliged to flee and seek refuge in the wilderness of Judea, where he soon gathered a band of 600 men, whom he kept in perfect control and employed only against the enemies of the land. He was still pursued by Saul with implacable hostility, and as he would not lift his hand against his king, though he often had him in his power, he at length judged it best to retire into the land of the Philistines. Here he was generously received as an enemy of Saul and of Israel, and given the town Ziklag as a dwelling place, where he and his men, with their households, lived while in that country, and which has been held by the kings of Judea unto this day. In 1055 BC, while the armies of the Philistines were being assembled at Aphek, a city of the tribe of Issachar, in the valley of Jezreel, preparatory to the attack upon the Israelites, who were camped at Jezreel, nearby in the same valley, the princes of the Philistines became suspicious of David and his forces who had accompanied them, and made complaint to Achish, their king, not to let him go into battle with them, lest he become their adversary. They said, "Is not this David of whom they sang one to another in dances, saying, Saul slew his 1,000, and David his 10,000. Then Achish, who had become a great friend of David, sent for him and said unto him, Thou hast been upright, and thy going out and thy coming in with me is good in my sight. For I have not found evil in thee since the day of thy coming unto me unto this day. Nevertheless, the Lord's favored thee not. Wherefore now return and go in peace, that thou displease not the Lord of the Philistines." So David and his men returned into the land of the Philistines. On their arrival at Ziklag, they found the town burned, and their wives and their sons and their daughters all taken captives and carried away by the Amalekites. David went at once in pursuit and soon overtook them, where he found them scattered about, eating and drinking and dancing, because of all the spoil that they had taken out of the land of the Philistines, and out of the land of Judea. David fought them from the twilight eve until the evening of the next day, and all that escaped were 400 young men, who rode away on camels. David recovered all of the Amalekites had carried away, wives, sons, daughters, and all the spoils they had taken. On his return to Ziklag, David sent a part of the spoil unto the elders of Judea, even to his friends, and his men were wont to haunt, saying, "Behold a present for you of the spoil of the enemies of the Lord." In later days, this would have been considered political shrewdness. The engagement between the Philistines and the Israelites resulted in a complete victory for the Philistines. The Israelites fled to Mount Gilboa, where all the sons of King Saul were slain but one, and Saul himself, being severely wounded, took his own life by falling upon his sword. The death of Saul opened the way for David to the promised throne. He was at once chosen king over the tribe of Judea, reigning at Hebron for 7 years, while Ishbosheth, Saul's only remaining son, was recognized as king of Israel and in power on the east side of the Jordan, and for 2 years was obeyed by all the tribes except Judah. In 1048 BC, Ishbosheth was assassinated and David became king over all of Israel. 1 Samuel 16, 2 Samuel 1-5. One of the first acts of his reign was the conquest of Jerusalem, the principal town of the Jebusites, who were the descendants of Canaan, and occupied that part of the land of Canaan, or Palestine, situated south of the center of the country, about 37 miles from the Mediterranean and about 24 miles from the river Jordan, an elevated ground upon which rests the city of Jerusalem, which they called Jebus, The old traditions and natural prepossessions both of Jews and Christians connected with Salem, of which Melchizedek was king. Genesis 45. The Jebusites seem to have been territorially one of the smallest of the Canaanite tribes, but from their position one of the strongest. In the conquest of Canaan, their king, Adonizedek, was slain by Joshua at Makkedah after the Battle of Beth Horon. Joshua 10. After Joshua's death in 1443 BC, the Israelites obtained possession of the town, which they afterwards jointly inhabited with the Jebusites for nearly 400 years. When David became king, 1055 BC, he expelled the latter and made it the capital of his kingdom, under the name of Jebus-Salem, or Jerusalem, where he reigned for 33 years. In 1045 BC, the Ark of the Covenant, which was at Kirjath-Jearim, was carried, under King David's instructions, to Jerusalem, where it was placed in a temporary tabernacle erected for its use. Here the priests performed their daily service until Solomon erected the temple. Then the temporary or Davidic tabernacle was put away as a relic. Both the old or Sinaitic and Davidic tabernacles were in time altogether lost sight of, and no doubt became victims of carelessness and the coordinating influence of time, or were burned up. David died in 1015 BC, having reigned 40 years, and was by far the greatest monarch that ever sat on the throne of Israel. Solomon, who succeeded to the throne, was the son of David by Bathsheba, whose husband, Uriah, he caused to be basely slain. 2 Samuel 11 and 12. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.